Myself, Reshma Pitale. I'm working with BNHS from last 8-9 years. Mainly working from Maharashtra coastline and dealing with biodiversity assessments. My personal interest lies with platyhelminth taxonomy, and I also involved in some. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So, can we start with the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. I'll be covering coastal habitats and marine life, but coastal habitats, I'll be talking more about the rocky sand, mudflat mangrove areas, how life survive here, and what are the conservation issues or what are the issues this diversity or the habitats are facing currently. So intertidal habitats, of course, we have 9 states and 4 united, hello, and total about 8,000 kilometer of coastline. The rocky intertidal areas, sandy shores, sand dunes, mangroves, mudflats, and we also have some coral patches along with these intertidal habitats. So basically, what is intertidal? Simply, the intertidal is a stretch between the shoreline, which is exposed during the high to low tide region. So it's simply the region in the it extends for a few meters, few kilometers long. It also depends on the physical structure of that shoreline. So at some places it exposed for a few meters, but at some places it also exposed for few kilometers long. The area is also known as littoral zone or littoral zone. Why the area is important? Obviously, it provides number of ecosystem services, including provisional services, ecological, the regulating services, and cultural services. So these habitats and these the flora and fauna inhabiting these habitats are useful not just for maintaining the ecological balance, but in some terms useful for coastal population as well. These also are benefits such as many people are dependent on fishing. We all know about it. And these ecosystems or these flora and fauna inhabiting these areas are some or other way, directly or indirectly, sustaining the fishery in some way. So let's start with the rocky shore habitats. Uh, Rocky shore, of course, we think that these are some rocky structures around and not be having some great diversity or colorful habitats here. But rocky shores also have the physical, interesting physical structures. Also have aircraft platforms, stable, sometimes it also has needs and limit number of species. There is a existence environment not or may not be not all organisms can adapted for this kind of environment. One can see a variety of physical structures as we have seen in the pictures here. Some loose substrate forms such as tables or holes, platforms which are fixed but enriched with shallow to deep rock pools. Critical environment here obviously thus very peculiar species inhabit these places. Vertical zonation. So this is one of the interesting fact about the rocky shores. If you can see in the pictures, there are certain organisms which are at some height, and then as you go down, there is a diversity of species or colorful species lies more closer to the water. So obviously these communities or these organisms organize themselves in a typical fashion or in a typical bands. This is called as vertical zonation. And this zonation is also found not just in a tropical waters or not just along the shores which are which are in the tropics, but you can also find these in the subtropical regions as well. So the zonation is typical for the all kinds of shoreline. Of course, the species and a group of species will differ based on that particular area. So as you go higher up the shore, the higher regions where area is maximum time exposed. So obviously there are maximum times of harsh conditions which are tolerated by typical species like periwinkles. Commonly, you might have learned about the littorinids or might have heard about the littorinid species or barnacles. And certain cyanobacterial films or some few algae also inhabit these places. As you move down towards the lower regions of the shore, you found more increased diversity, more increased assemblages, and complex biodiversity as you move down with the shore. So, what are the critical conditions over there I'm talking about, and then how do they cope up with this survival? So there are 2-3 things that when the tide exposed, there is either an intense sunlight or obviously which causes a temperature increase, salinity, and other microenvironmental variations. So how do they cope up? So let's see some of the interesting examples here. As mentioned, exposed rocky shore, I have mentioned about the exposed rocky shore. So these tiny individuals, uh, these littorinids shells are abundantly found in the high tide areas. There are certain species which are also found in low tide areas, but if you can see in the picture, they prefer the crevices or how do they clump together and clamp themselves firmly with the substratum so that they can seal some sort of a moisture to survive during the exposed time period. Barnacles completely remain closed during the low tide, so obviously they can save with the moisture condition, and they will not desiccate during the exposed period. So these are some another interesting example from the mid tide to low tide regions. See how they prefer the shady places. This is a Perna viridis, very common bivalve species.
Ma'am,
These are some. Hello.
Rishma, this is Kiran. Participants are requesting to go slow. It's a bit fast for them as they were amateurs.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So these are some. Can I go back and explain again?
Yeah, from previous slide, you can do that.
From this
Previous slide.
rocky shore.
From this you can explain. Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about the intertidal area. Intertidal area is basically area between the high tide and low tide region. So when water exposed, these area get open, and we can see the diversity or habitat in these places. So the substrate is different. Obviously, in case of rocky shores, there are wave cut platform. There are some loose substrates such as boulders or pebble fields, and there are engraved rock pools as well. So these rock pools can be of different sizes and shapes. So there are certain vertical cliffs as well. I can explain here. If you can see this picture, you can see how organisms are organized them in particular fashion. So what is vertical zonation? So basically these communities organize themselves on a rocky shore in a typical band, or they organize themselves in a particular places most suitable for them. So this is known as a vertical zonation. So once you move the higher up the shore towards the high tide region, which are the area which is maximum exposed during the high tides. So these areas have been taken up by the most of the littorinids or periwinkles, we commonly call it as, and some of the oysters, barnacles, or cyanobacterial films, or some algal species. As you move down towards the lower region of the shore, you found more diverse, more colorful life, and as obviously this is we can compare this. As you move down towards the low tide region, there is more water, there is more moisture, and food opportunities. The diversity increases with the low tide region. So I'm talking talking about this is very difficult area to survive and very particular species cope up with this environment. So what are these conditions and how do they cope up with this kind of environment? As I said, the intertidal area is simply the area between the high tide and low tide region, and we explore this area during the low tide. So low tide means the water completely resides. So it's very difficult for these organisms, these small tiny creatures, to deal with intense sunlight, temperature, salinity, or even changes in their micro environmental variation. So how do they cope up? We have some interesting example to see. At the higher of the shore, the high tide region, I have mentioned about littorinid shells. So if you can see in the pictures, how do they clump together or congregate themselves, or prefers the shady places, clump and clamp with the substratum. This is another littorinid preferring the shady or the small crevice in the rock. Uh, these are the barnacles, and this is the opening through which barnacles open up. So they completely closes this wall during the low tide. These species can moisture for their next 5-6 hours for survival till the next tide comes. This is another example. This is a Perna viridis shell. If you can see this green color bivalve species, these are the Perna viridis shell, one of the common species along the west coast. Is a nebulous shell, where these fish together and preferring with the this is a species preferring the places or the underside of the boulders or underside of the pebbles to cope up with the environment. So we have learned about the high tide and high tide region where water will completely reside, and how these animals will tackle with this kind of a situation. But then what about the low tide region? Because at the low tide or at the extreme lower region of the shore, the water will come up, or the waves will be coming in. So what will happen to these organisms? So we have seen some shell protecting themselves from intense sunlight, but what will be the case at the low tide region where moisture is not the problem, but wave action is. So for these organisms, if you see, the water is constantly coming in. So water or moisture content or the food content for the filter feeders is not the problem, but is the wave action might damage them, physically damage them. So what do they do? The sessile organism, meaning the organisms which are remain attached to the substratum, constantly remain attached to the substratum. So these sessile organisms anyway fixed themselves to the substratum, so there is no problem that they might wash off from the shore, but they remain closed during the low tide, so that, or they have a hard shell, so that there cannot be a physical damage to this species. uh, okay, we have seen about the sessile organisms, that they remain stick to the or they remain firm up with the substratum. But then what about the mobile creatures? Like we all know about the crabs and the shells, which keep on moving here and there. So what they must be doing? So what happened at the low tide region? I've mentioned earlier, as you go down, there is the diversity increases, the cover increases. So these organisms remain underside of these algal cover, or under the pebbles or cobble, so that they have the moisture, but they remain safe from the. Okay, so in this struggle, in this whole struggle, there must be a competition for space. If you can see in the photos, these are the oysters. the barnacle and number of algae, the diversity of algae you can see here. These are the pictures from the low tide region. This is you can see these barnacle shells, the big barnacle shells, which are covered by the algal species or overgrown by the algal species. So obviously, in this whole struggle, there must be a competition for the space, because every individual or every best suitable place in terms of food and shelter. Every organism will prefer this kind of a space. So how do they manage to do all these things? So that's the complex ecosystem they create here. Can you see this picture? We can see the hydroids. We can see this orange color sponge. There are many algal species lying between. This is the calcareous species of the algae. So there are many species which are lying in association with each other. These associations might be beneficial for both the species, or these associations can be commensal, or there are many other things which are still undefined. This is a Zoanthus mat, and this is a sea anemone, the rare sea anemone one can see. This is a sargassum cover. There are some green algae and some calcareous algae here. So can you see some organism here? This is the one. This is a bryozoan species. Bryozoan is one of the mat forming, calcareous mat forming species, microscopic species, remain in colony. This is a colony of bryozoan, and this is one of the platyhelminths which prefer to live over this bryozoan. So how these tiny individuals merge with their preferred substratum. If you can see this mollusk, the tiny sea slug, how she is showing the very similar structure like the hydroid polyps. This is another platyhelminth, and this is a assyrian on which it feeds. So you can see how the color pattern and how these organisms merge with their substratum to remain safe, or remain at the place which is most suitable for them. So rock pools. Rock pools are most interesting stuff at the rocky shores. We can call it rock pools as it itself is an ecosystem, because there are huge diversity, and you can see these pictures. These are the lateral walls of these rock pools. There are many individuals. You can name any individual or any group of any groups from the invertebrate phyla which lies alongside of the rock pools or underside of the pebbles. So there are polychaetes, there are sponges, there are anemones, there are the zoanthid mats, then hydroids, and so on and so forth. There are also some algae which are found along the lateral walls of these rock pools. If you can see, some of the deep rock pools of are also holds the pebble and cobbles at their bottom. The undersurface fauna of these pebble and cobbles are also very interesting and holds variety of invertebrates and colorful diversity. Some fish species also you can found in these rock pools even during the low tide, because these rock pools holds the water during the low tide. These rock pools also show some sort of a zonation. There are the typical arrangement, like these zoanthid mats are organized, and then sea anemones, and then hydroids, and how the algae should be arranged. There are certain zonations also found in rock pools. So here also organisms are properly arranged based on their preferences. Like some species prefer the sunlight, some species for the shade places. Accordingly, this zonation is very peculiar in the rock pools, or one can easily observe. So, what is the importance of rock tissue? General rock as a factor provide the stability to the shore we also have some calcareous species like this. The colony of these calcareous species also adds to these add to this stability. If we have seen the Zoanthus mat, these mat also has the calcium structure very similar to the coral species. So these also adds to these stability. And there are algal components which, besides providing the shelter and food for the other invertebrates, also helps in the carbon sequestration. Then there are complex ecology, as I have mentioned earlier, that many species live together. Many species show the associations. There are competition for food, and their survival during the exposed period. So these species has a complex ecosystem. So the species lives in a complex ecology, and that's why many scientists termed Rocky Shore as a natural laboratory, because these are the best places where we can see the climate changes, how climate changes are influencing the species, or even the if any changes happening in the physical or chemical parameters, the species can be a good indicator for all these. Why these species are good indicators, I will help you to recollect that we have mentioned that these species prefer a specific band or a specific zone along the shoreline. So if there are any changes, in the physical environment, or any of the required parameters or important parameters, the species will change their, either in terms of population or the species composition, or so on so forth. So there are number of other indicators which will tell us that there are certain influences happening because of some other reasons, or some other influences. This is a picture I will tell you. This is a picture. These are also bryozoan species. This is a picture from the lateral wall of the rock pool. So if you can see here also the diversity of species like bryozoans. This one is gastropod. Here are some sponges here, colorful sponges, and then anemones. So this is how the rocky shore, and these many colors you can see, and this much of diversity you can see along the rocky shore. Let's start with the sandy shores now. There are three types of sandy shores: dissipative and intermediate. The type of sandy shore is based on the slope and the physical structure. So if it is more steeper, the highest steeper sandy shore is a reflective type. The broader or the flatter shore is a dissipative type, or intermediate one is something between the reflective or dissipative type. In case of sandy shores, fauna and flora, the slope of the shore and the texture or the kind of a sand inhabiting in this place is very important, who will determine the diversity of species lying here. And there is also called as interstitial fauna. Interstitial space means the space between the sand particles. So interstitial fauna, where obviously you can imagine the space between the sand particles, the tiny space between the sand particles, where obviously some tiny individuals, some tiny creatures will live. So there are some micro and neobenthic diversity, the organism which are only visible through the microscopes, lies here. So there are some worms such as polychaetes, some small brachiourins, some gastropods, some micromollusks, and some bivalves, and many such individuals remain in this. The sandy shores, otherwise you feel like it has no diversity or it no flora or fauna, but this is not the case. As I have mentioned, there are individuals which remain within the sandy substratum, which you may not see directly from your eyes. You need a microscope for that, but there is a good amount of diversity here. So as I have mentioned here, that there are reflective, dissipative, or intermediate kind of sandy shores. So that also depends on how the wave action there. If there is a dissipative or a flat kind of a sandy shore, the wave action will be different, or it will be more stronger. In case of reflective, it will be different, or in case of intermediate kind of a thing, the wave action will be different. Then again, there will be a dynamic environment which will be sustained, or which will be struggled by many individuals. So what is that strategy that these organisms prefer? So obviously the burrowing strategy is the most or the best fitted strategy these individuals prefer. You can see this shell, the Oliva species, which are trying to get into the sand, or you must have commonly seen these structures or this kind of a sand deposition along the holes, the most commonly created by the brachyurans. So what kind of adaptations these organisms shows? So obviously they have morphological, physiological, or sensorial adaptation, so that they can sense the taxis, any sort of movement, any sort of directional stimulus, or any sort of light or shadow kind of a stimulus. So these organisms can burrow immediately burrow themselves to remain safe from the predator. So, what is the importance of sandy shore? I think we all know that the marine turtles come to the typical sandy shores for their breeding every year. Then the many bird species also finds these exposed seashores for as a resting habitat or for as a nurseries. There are also recreational opportunities. This is also source of a stand, but the most important sandy shore is for the biocatalytical filters, because through the sand the water naturally get filtered, and many organic, inorganic, and many other particles can get filtered through the sand. So the sandy shores are known as a biocatalytical filters. So there are some sand dunes. Sandy shores have some high sandy places, or a hill, sandy hill like structures behind the shore towards the land sides. So what is these sand dunes are? So the sand dunes are formed at the interface between the sea and the land. So once the shore, the sandy shore, and it forms between the land, and dune develop at the back of the beaches, obviously, as I have mentioned, and only places where there is enough supply for sand or wave energy which transports the sand from the shore side to the land. So there are dunes which is from all the sizes, all different kinds of dunes you can see. And these dunes formation is also depends on the seasons, and also depends on the kind of a wave action or kind of a wind energy present at that particular time and the season period. So if you can observe here, there is a very typical, even if it's a dry place, we can see some typical vegetation preferring these areas. So this vegetation obviously have the roots which can hold the sand in place, and these grasses also nitrify the soil, so they allow the more less hardy plant species to survive here, and they also have they also prevent the intrusion of salt water, the freshwater sources towards the landscape. Some vegetative species have ethnobotanical importance, like they are used as a nitrogen fixators, some used in a green manures or used in a fishery for a fishing aggregators. There are also certain interesting animal species survive in this area. Certain reptiles, some microscopic organisms like polychaetes, some turbellarians, some amphipods, and some brachyurans also prefer these areas. Although these dry areas, but these animals also survive. And there are many incidences where sea turtles found preferring sand dunes for their nest. So what is the exact importance of the sand dune in general? So we can say that nature have its own way of protecting the shore. So physical barrier and protect the land from the heavy waves, obviously. Then casuarina plantation is the most important threat to these sand dune or sand dune vegetation. How these casuarina is it really affect because evergreen overgrows and dominate the other natural vegetation lying over there. So, and not only this, but they also alters the physical structure of the sand dune, which will ultimately affect the other benefits of the sand dunes or sand dune vegetation. Mangroves. So mangroves, you might have seen these plants growing along some dirty, muddy, swampy areas. But these are the most important forests we have on our shoreline. So why these forests are important? If you can see here, mangroves among the most carbon-rich forests, and they sequester 2 to 4 times the greater rate than even a mature tropical rainforest or tropical forest can sequester a carbon. So that's why I think mangroves are more important than any terrestrial forest. Besides, why mangroves are interesting, because they survive in these kind of swampy, muddy areas. So they must possess, or they must own some interesting morphological or physiological features, so that they can survive in this kind of this sort of a swampy area. There are, if you can see, there are extreme saline conditions, less oxygen, higher organic loose muddy substratum. If you can see here, there are some loose muddy substratum, and obviously, how this species, how this vegetation survive in this environment. So this species has some interesting building roots, and also the the structure of these roots in a such a way that they can withstand this kind of environment. And they also have some the character which the leaves which can exempt salt in a time span. So diversity. We have 69 species, 41 genera, and 29 families overall.
Hello, ma'am. Reshma. Your voice is breaking a lot. Is there a network issue from your side? Hello.
25 genera and coast, and about 8 species of mangroves are restricted to west coast, whereas 25 mangrove species are restricted to east coast of India. Yeah, there's another interesting fact which we can observe in these mangrove environment, in this swampy environment. Vertical migration of some creatures.
Hello.
If you can see in this picture, we share.
Reshma
Hello?
madam. Reshma madam, your voice is breaking. Can you go to a previous slide?
Which
Your
slide?
voice is breaking a lot.
This one? This
Uh,
one?
yeah, previous one. Mangrove.
Okay.
Is there
Mangrove?
any network? Ah,
No, not from my side, but I don't know.
oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Anyway,
Thank you, ma'am.
so we'll start with the mangroves again. I've got to know that my voice was not clear. Mangroves are a plants or a special vegetative forest which grows between the soil and the water, or from the terrestrial, or between the marine to the terrestrial environment. So these mangrove forests consist of diverse salt tolerant trees and other plant species. So why these mangroves are so special? So besides protecting the shore, these mangroves also sequester carbon 2 to 4 times more at a more greater rate than even a mature tropical forest can sequester. So that's why these mangroves are more important besides their additional ecosystem services. So as I've mentioned, these muddy, swampy areas are where these special vegetations are. How do they adapt to these kind of swampy areas? So if I can describe these areas, these are more saline. There are more saline conditions, less oxygen, high organic contents, loose muddy substratum, and tidal forces. So how does vegetation survive in these areas? So there are special breathing roots, or the architecture of these roots in such a way that they can withstand these plants in this environment. And also they have leaves which, in a time frame exempt the salt. So there won't be an issue of extreme saline condition. So what about diversity? We have around, in India, we have around 59 species of to the west coast, and about 25 mangroves which are restricted to east coast. About 8 mangrove species which are only restricted to west coast of India. Uh, So there is another interesting fact about the lying over. So there are morphological adaptations or architecture from the environment inhabited by these mangroves. So the same adaptations or some interesting facts you can find about some of the gastropod or some of the other. Has to these some species are known to do a vertical migration, meaning they climb up the tree trunks during the high tides to remain safe, and creep down during the low tide, to feed upon the or they scrape the food along the dead leaves or microalgae or any detritus material they are feeding upon. So that's the one of the interesting behavior you can easily observe in the mangrove swamps. This is a Melampus species very commonly occurring along the west coast. This is a Cassidula species. The Littorinids, which prefer the leaves or the higher up the trees, and this is the Oncidium species lying along the mudflats. So in general, as I have mentioned that mangroves, or perhaps we all know that mangroves are so important, to protect our coastline, and they can withstand even against the tsunamis or any high surges. But what are the other ecological or economical importance of these species or these forests? They also preferred nursery grounds. They are the preferred nursery grounds by many fish species or many shell or crustacean species. Some of the species migrate specially in these areas, in these swampy areas, to breed, and also sources for some important shellfishes. They also stabilize the sediment. Because of this vegetation, the sedimentation rate decreases and clear ups the water column. Uh, they bring the fuel wood or cattle feed, but there are also medicinal benefits of these plants. But of course, these benefits differ with the mangrove species. Every species has its own benefits for different disease or different allergies. Uh, they also provide certain benefits and services which are very much important in terms of climate change or sea level rise. What are the threats to this habitat? Deforestation, obviously, because of these benefits, whether they provide a best fuel wood or a cattle feed, there is a lot of deforestation. There are pollutions, the chemicals which are interfering with the physiological conditions, the bund constructions which restrict the ingression of tidal water into the habitat, which will also hamper their survival, and coastal construction, which will completely wipe out the habitat. Mudflat. If you see these habitats, we feel that these are the dirty places, but these coastal mudflats are important spawning and nursery grounds for very important species. Keystone species are again the shellfish species. And also these areas are foraging and roosting sites for hundreds of migratory birds and even the local bird species. We can also see some oyster beds or bivalve species lying along these mudflats, which are important food sources for local people. If you can see, this is a picture from a Mumbai region. There are exposed mudflats and lakhs of flamingos coming every year, or many other weather species coming here and prefer these areas for feeding or roosting. Mud have been completely occupied by these migratory beauties. Seagrass. Seagrass are commonly known as lungs of the sea. These are the grass species. Some has the long stripes, or some are the smaller leaves like this. This is a Halophila species. Why again the seagrass is important? Because again the seagrass, a square 1 centimeter of seagrass can generate liters of oxygen photosynthesis, and also they have very much higher rate of the carbon sequestration. So again they have a role in the blue carbon ecosystem. What they do, what are the other importance of the seagrasses? Simply they remain anchored with the substratum or these multi-peptides. So they slow down the flow of water and capture the sediment particles and uh, threats. Physical destructions such as anchoring or boat propelling or this. The boat propeller or anchor simply invert them from the substrate. So there is a physical damage to the vegetations, or pollution, or some disease to this vegetation will obviously hamper their survival or population or growth. Distribution. Uh, we have in India major seagrass patches or meadows on the southeast areas. The Gulf of Mannar or Palk Bay or the lagoons of the Lakshadweep and Andaman Nicobar have the highest areas of seagrass. We have around 15 species of seagrass, but which are dominated by these are some examples of species which are dominantly found along our shoreline. So their distribution is occur from the intertidal areas to the some depth up to the 15 to 20 meters. Also, this vegetation is found. We have in our coastal areas, like on the intertidal areas, these species are found along the exposed mudflats and sensitive coastal areas. So along with this vegetation, there are also associated species, floral and faunal species. But most importantly, the green sea turtle and dugong prefer these patches because they feed on seagrasses beside the flora. So we have learned about the coastal habitats, what are the physical structures, what are the differences in the physical structures from the rocky shores to loose substratum like sandy shores or the swampy areas of mudflats and the seagrasses. Uh, let's see some other facets of the story. There are still there is no complete evaluation of the diversity from these intertidal habitats. There are certain taxa for which information is absolutely unknown. So obviously, if we do not have the exact idea of the diversity or exact idea of the taxa inhabiting these areas, we can't find out or we can't see how these areas are really diverse and how these areas are really important in an ecological space for a particular region. So and also we are not really sure are the conservation issues, exactly conservation issues each site is facing. So there are certain conservation issues which we can definitely list down, but for the precise site and the allied conservation issues, we are not yet have the information about. So there are certain issues which I can definitely share, like I have mentioned about the mangrove deforestation and the bunds. If you can see this bund, the water is completely restricted or in a partly restricted in an area, so vegetation cannot receive the daily tidal influence. So obviously their survival in if this align water ingression. In terms of, in case of sandy habitats, if you can see there is a huge amount of sand mining, or there are constructions lying within the sand dunes or within the sandy shore or high tide regions of the which obviously completely damage or fragments the habitat, which will ultimately affect the fauna or flora lying along or lying within these uh, or preferring these particular habitats. Reclamations, of course, completely wiped out that particular habitat. So obviously, the whole diversity remains in questions. As there is no habitat, the whole diversity is in question. There are certain other issues as well, like if you have seen the heavy marine traffic, or there is a pollution. This is a picture from one of the mangrove area. If you can see this chemical line within, there is a huge amount of plastic. I think these mangrove have learned to also filter the plastic besides filtering the pollutants or any organic content in the happening in the environment. Or there are certain recreational activities. If you have seen, if you can see these activities, if these kind of vehicles are traveling along the shore daily or number of times, they will flatten the whole surface, and obviously it will physically damage the tiny individuals within sandy or interstitial spaces. So I have mentioned about the marine traffic here. So there is another issue which is very closely allied to this marine traffic is the ballast water. This water coming from the different places or different areas also carries some return or some individuals or maybe some species which can survive here, and how the species outcompete the local species. And there are certain rules and regulation about these ballast water treatment. There are some issues, or there are species which have already traveled across the world because of these and seriously affects the ecosystem or the diversity in the local areas. Then there are oil spill issues. Obviously, oil spill directly, physically, besides the chemical effect, it physically also affects the then there is a chemical pollution, the tourism effects. There is a lot of human interference because of the tourism along these habitats. The plastic pollution or the microbeads. If you are using the scrubbers, the or the some cosmetics which has the microbeads. These microbeads directly go into the water because our filter systems cannot filter them, and these microbeads are taken up by the small fish or any other animals in the water, and which get stuck into their digestive systems and seriously damage the organism. There are other issues such as ghost nets, which again accidentally damage the marine mammal species, fish, and sometimes pelagic birds. Firstly, there is a well-studied research very few kinds of the patches, or very few species climate. Uh,
Hello, ma'am. Your voice, Reshma madam. Hello, Reshma ma'am. Yeah, your voice was breaking.
Okay, now.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello, ma'am.
Yeah, now it's clear.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So there are other issues as well because of the coastal constructions. There are a lot of changes in terms of chemical environment, in terms of physical environment, and as I have mentioned in the rocky changes influence the naturally harboring communities in those particular areas. And of course, there is a global issue like climate change or the sea level rise or the increased temperature. For which we have very limited information. The few communities or the few coral reef patches or the few species for which the effect of these CSST or effect of this climate change has been studied. There are number of patches or number of areas or number of species or communities for which we yet do not know the exact influence of the climate change or the temperature or any other physical variations having those. Change. So some of the photographs are shared by my colleagues. Thank you.